Hello everyone, in this video we will learn how to prove angles congruent. Alright, first we're going to talk about the two-column proof. A two-column proof shows statements and reason or justification for each statement of a proof aligned in two columns. A paragraph proof gives statements and reasons or justification of a proof written as sentence in a paragraph. So basically, we have three different ways to complete a proof. The first one is two-column proof. The second one is paragraph proof. And the third one is the flowchart, which you're going to learn in the other lesson. Alright, example number 1. Use two-column proof to prove the vertical angles theorem. Alright, we have the theorem. Vertical angles are congruent, which means angle 1 congruent to angle 3, angle 2 congruent to angle 4. Alright, we given angle 1 and angle 3 are verticals. We need to prove angle 1 congruent to angle 3, right? Now, remember, in order to complete a proof, you always start with the given things, right? And you're going to end up with the proof right here, right? So, I need to copy this one down over here. Now, number 2. We have angle 1 and angle 2 right here. And supplementary, right? Angle 2, angle 3 are supplementary, right? How do we explain this one? Observe that angle 1, angle 2 are linear pair, right? Angle 2, angle 3 are linear pairs, right? So, angles that form a linear pair are supplementary, right? Since angle 1, angle 2 are supplementary, we have angle 1 plus angle 2 equals 180 degrees, right? Angle 3, angle 2 are supplementary, then angle 3 plus angle 2 equals 180 degrees, right? Now, how do we explain this one? We're going to say the sum of the measure of supplementary angles is 180 degrees, right? Now, from step number 3, we can conclude that angle 1 plus angle 2 equals angle 3 plus angle 2, right? And this guy actually transitive property, right? Because they both equals 180 degrees. Now, both sides have the same angle 2, right? We can subtract the measure of angle 2 both sides. So we have step number 5. The measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 3. This is actually subtraction property of equality. Now, since the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 3, we can conclude that the angle 1 congruent to angle 3, right? This is called angle with the same measures are congruent. Now, let's move on to example number 2. We're going to use the paragraph proof and the vertical angle theorem to prove the following. Given angle 1 congruent to angle 4, this guy right here, we need to prove that angle 2 congruent to angle 3. We're going to start with the given thing, right? So we're going to say that since angle 1 congruent to angle 4 is given, right? But angle 4 congruent to angle 2 by the vertical angles theorem, right? So we can conclude that angle 1 congruent to angle 2 by transitive property of congruence, right? But angle 1 congruent to angle 3, right? By vertical angles theorem, right? So then we can conclude that angle 2 congruent to angle 3 by transitive property of congruence. And that's finished the proof, right? Now let's move on to example number 3. Using paragraph proof to prove congruent supplements theorem. Alright, so if you have angle 1 and angle 3 as supplements, and angle 2, angle 3 as supplements, right? Then angle 1 congruent to angle 2. Now to prove this theorem, we need to start with the given thing, right? So we're going to say angle 1 and angle 3 are supplementary because it's given, right? So the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 3 equals 180 degrees by definition of supplementary angles, right? Now we're going to reason the same thing for angle 2 and angle 3, right? By the transitive property of equality, you have measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 3 equals the measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 3, right? And then both sides have the same measure of angle 3. We're going to subtract the measure of angle 3 both sides by the subtraction property of equality. Then you're going to end up with measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2, right? Then you can conclude that angle 1 congruent to angle 2 because angles with the same measure are congruent. Then this finishes the proof, right? Now let's move on to example number 4. Using two-column proof to prove the congruent complements theorem. Alright, so basically example number 4 is exactly the same thing as example number 3, right? The only thing different right here is supplements and complements. And example number 4, we're going to use two-column proof instead of the paragraph proof in the example number 3, right? So we're going to start with the given thing right here, right? Since two angles are complementary, they add up to 90 degrees, right? This is because of the definition of complementary angles, right? Now, by transitive property, the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 2. If we subtract the measure of angle 2 both sides, we're going to end up with measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 3 by the subtraction property of equality. Since the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 3, we're going to have the angle 1 congruent to angle 3. Since angles with the same measure are congruent. Example number 5. We're going to use two-column proof to prove the congruent right angles theorem. Alright, given angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles, we need to prove that angle 1 congruent to angle 2. Alright, so we're going to start with the given things, right? So angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles. Since angle 1 and angle 2 are right angles, we have the measure of angle 1 equals 90 degrees, right? And measure of angle 2 equals 90 degrees, right? This one is the definition of the right angles. Now, since the measure of angle 1 equals 90 degrees and measure of angle 2 equals 90 degrees, we can conclude that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2 by transitive properties, right? Because they both equals 90 degrees, right? Now, since the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2, we can conclude that angle 1 congruent to angle 2. Angles with the same measures are congruent. Now, example number 6, we're going to use paragraph proof to prove the congruent supplementary angles theorem. Alright, given angle 1 congruent to angle 2 and angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary, we need to prove that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2 equals 90 degrees. Now, to prove this theorem, we're going to start with the given thing, right? So, we have the angle 1 congruent to angle 2 because it's given, right? Congruent angles have the same measures, right? Now, angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary, right? Then, the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees, right? By the definition of supplementary angles. Now, from these two guys right here, I will substitute the measure of angle 2 for the measure of angle 1 into this one right here, right? Now if we add this guy up, it's going to be 2 measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees, right? Now we're going to divide both sides by 2. So we have the measure of angle 2 equals 90 degrees by the division property of equality. Now we're going to combine this guy and this guy right here. We can conclude that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2 equals 90 degrees by the transitive property of equality. And it's good time to stop. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember that if you failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail.
We rise like tall buildings as the chemicals they take us higher. The night's young and it's just begun as she puts her hand in mine.